So before I went to break, I teased our next topic. There's been a lot of uproar among progressive circles over Pete Buttigieg. Now, what I do want to say is there's a lot of tribalism among the left. Uh, Basically, everything defers to supporting Bernie, getting Bernie elected. Um, and there's a certain Bernie or bust sentiment among the left that I don't agree with, but I'm not ready to take on because I think it is extremely important to elect Bernie Sanders. So I understand what that tribalism is about. I also understand that the viciousness of the attacks, especially from like the Bernie side of YouTube, can sometimes put off the less aggressive kind of progressive who's trying to really understand candidates on their merits. And one thing Pete Buttigieg does really well is he masks a lot of very run-of-the-mill milquetoast centrist views in progressive rhetoric. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the overall sense of Buttigieg's platform, his pitch to the people, and his rhetoric as well. So I unironically believe I would rather have Joe Biden than Pete Buttigieg as the nominee. And that's not just because he has a better chance in the general, which he does. It may come as a surprise because of the tones of their campaigns, how different the things they purport to stand for, and their support bases. But there is a value to saying, to me, there's a value of having a genuine regressive over somebody who sinisterly undermines progressive politics and really gives progressivism a bad name. Buttigieg entered the race calling criticisms of Medicare for All Republican talking points. He's known for penning an essay in which he compliments Bernie Sanders on being a willfully unapologetically progressive. He entered the presidential race as a progressive, pro Medicare for all, uh, anti-police brutality, despite a very, very disturbing allegations against him in South Bend, and pro education reform, everything you can think of, pro worker. This is how he signaled. From what I can tell, and this is largely a guess, an educated guess, once he discovered there was really no share in the polls for him running as a progressive, that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren pretty much had that locked up and they had a lot more cred with the voters. Once he realized there was no value in running as a progressive, he just started to move further and further to the center. But the roots of his rhetoric, that stayed the same. His tone stayed the same. And that's what's really scary about Pete Buttigieg. He continues to adopt progressive buzzwords and progressive talking points. But he uses them to advertise not very progressive policy positions. Medicare for all who want it is literally just a public option. And we're going to talk about why public option is a bad idea, why there are better ways to move towards single payer, and why single payer or multi-payer, why a universal nationalized healthcare system of some kind is probably the best move for American politics. We'll talk about that probably on a future podcast. I hope to do one before the end of the year because it's a very interesting topic. But for now, the main thing to note is that the public option is highly ineffective and a serious problem for multiple reasons, including that it does not give the government enough power to negotiate healthcare costs. It forces us to compete with private healthcare providers who have a disproportionate amount of power in the industry, and it's not going to reduce the cost of healthcare. It's still going to force incredible amount of cost onto consumers, and it doesn't actually provide a premium-free form of healthcare to those who cannot afford premiums, period. So basically, like, to put it kind of gruffly, Medicare for all who want it is just Biden care, but without a boomer face on it. It's spruced up to look like a policy challenge without really any kind of teeth. Buttigieg employs a similar tactic against the free public college option, where he says, why should billionaires get to send their kids to school for free? And of course, any detailed examination of the statement is ridiculous. We don't employ this argument when we give the rich access to public transportation or highways or Social Security or Medicare. We don't do it with the fire department. No one's complaining that the rich shouldn't get access to the fire department. The whole point of giving the rich access to free college is, A, we don't bog down our infrastructure with forms upon forms of means testing. You don't have to apply for to show that you're poor enough to go to a public school. And in addition, there's no status stigma, where if the rich get to send their kids to college for free, there's no concept of like, oh, you go to the poor college. No, this is the public college. And everyone's paying for it. And if I'm going to pay for my kids, if I'm going to pay for your kids to go there, I'm going to send my kids there for free. And I'm going to have a lot more investment into the quality of that system. And also, it's a good idea to have people breaking class lines in their education. That is so important. One of the most important experiences I had as a pretty privileged person was to go to university with a pretty high representation of first-generation college students, of people coming in on scholarships, Rhodes Scholars, people who... I think Anbright Scholars. I worked with an Anbright Scholar who was I think is a scholarship for first generation college students. And to actually have your experience not completely confirmed and your biases confirmed by being surrounded by people with the same life history as you have. But secondarily, it's just like means testing makes things worse. It makes it harder for people to qualify for things that they need for free college. Imagine having a federal application for fire station assistance, where it's like, oh, your house is on fire, we're going to need you to fill out a FAFSA. We don't do that, because means testing consistently proves to be a barrier to access, and it deprives far more assistance to those who need it than gives assistance to those who don't. And when rich people are sending their kids to school, they're not sending them for free. They're the ones paying the taxes. The taxes will be higher, but the difference will be that they're paying the tuition for their own kids. If they don't want to send them there, they don't have to send them there. It's the same as a single-payer healthcare system. Well, we'll get to that. I mean, you can always pay out of pocket. And then there was another really dishonest talking point from Buttigieg, where he said, we talk all the time about college, but what about people without college degrees? What about people who go into non-college trade professions? And that really was transparent as to, he's just trying to hit any snide, disgusting, dishonest talking point that he can. But I'm going to let Bernie Sanders actually speak for himself here.
What do you say to that argument that there's no reason to pay for people who've been paid for free?
Well, I say Buttigieg is wrong on both counts. Number one, of course, when we talk about making higher education, public colleges and universities tuition-free, we mean not only college, but we mean trade schools as well. There are millions of good jobs out there in construction and all kinds of areas where people are good at working with their hands. They don't want to go to college. And of course, we are going to make tuition free for those people. So what he's saying is not accurate. Second of all, there is the issue of universality. I'm very glad that Mr. Buttigieg is worried that I have been too easy on upper income people and the millionaires and billionaires, that I'm going to allow their kids to go to public colleges and universities. Just by the way, as they do go to public schools right now, Trump's kids can go to any public school, elementary school, high school in the country, tuition free. But the point is, I happen to believe that when you talk about programs like Social Security, like health care, like higher education, they should be universal. The way you pay for them, and the way I do it, not the way Buttigieg does it, is I do demand that at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, that the very rich will start paying their fair share of taxes, as will corporate America. You pay for it by raising revenue from the very rich, but then you say in a very simple way that any person who wants a higher education, college, trade school, should be able to do it. You know, right now, that's what we do with Social Security. It is a popular program. It is a universal program.
So, yeah, I mean, there it is. Clear as day, just complete. And this is the thing about Bernie Sanders, that he talks with such clarity and he says, no, this is exactly why he's wrong, and I'm going to say it. And I can all but guarantee that Elizabeth Warren, all things neutral, would absolutely co-sign that statement. Warren also supports free college. She would say, of course we're going to send people to trade schools and vocational schools. That's the whole point of this initiative. The whole point of this initiative is to lift people out of poverty. So this tactic of trying to attack Sanders from the left, it's obviously not going to work. And it's only going to appeal to people who weren't predisposed to vote for Bernie Sanders anyway. But I can only hope that constantly showing people, especially people from my kind of background, who don't necessarily like the populist tone of Sanders' rhetoric, will eventually see that, like, this is what Bernie Sanders is about. Pete Buttigieg does not represent the progressive values of today's left. He doesn't have a background in democratic action, and what political record he has is murky at best, especially when it comes to advocating for people who don't come from his level of privilege. But he continues to appropriate progressive vocabulary while consistently trying to belittle progressive proposals. At best, this tactic is misguided pragmatism, and to see it that way requires an astronomically charitable reading of Buttigieg's arguments. And at worst, he's a corporate Trojan horse protecting the Zuckerbergs of the world while trying to make us believe he cares about anything. Most likely, it's a medium where he's a centrist, he's a concerned troll from the center who very much could do lasting damage to the progressive cause by associating his own ineffective neoliberal brand with the progressive rhetoric he continues to appropriate. When he talks about Medicare for all who want it, and then if he were to be elected and institute a public option and that fails, the word Medicare for all would permanently be associated with the failed healthcare system that he instituted. And that's very, very, very dangerous, and that does lasting damage to the progressive brand. If Biden is nominated and he's elected, and his presidency is the same disaster that got us here, the left can clearly distinguish itself from him. And we can make another case. We can say, see, we told you not to nominate Biden. We told you not to nominate Biden. And if Biden loses to Trump, which every decent person hopes he doesn't, I hope whoever the Democratic nominee is beats Trump, and I will vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is, obviously. But if Biden were to lose to Trump, a very meager consolation prize would be that our fears about running another status quo candidate, especially someone who's a little bit concerning in his demeanor, as Biden is, that those fears would be vindicated. Not worth it, obviously, but at least we would know, yeah, maybe I was a little bit right there. And so we can do that because Biden is sincere in his centrism. And I respect that. I actually do respect that. Now, Buttigieg, first off, he gets creamed in a general. I don't understand Buttigieg gets destroyed in a general versus Trump via black turnout alone. You can't run a Democratic candidate with zero black support. It's a losing formula. And when he loses, he's uniquely placed to bring down both the center and the left with him, because there's so many people who believe he's from both. As a candidate, he would represent the left to anyone who's not of the left. And he would also represent the center. That's very, 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 just very concerning. So the point is, don't vote for Pete Buttigieg. If you want a centrist, vote for Biden. Biden is the strongest center candidate against Trump. And he's also leading the polls right now. If you want a centrist, vote for Biden. You shouldn't want a centrist. Centrists are what got us to Trump in the first place. And if you want someone who's not quite so radical as Bernie, I also still disagree with you, but I understand where you're coming from because I come from that place as well. You should vote for Elizabeth Warren. If you want the best candidate for the job, who will change the narrative, who will reshape dialogue in this country, and who will actually move us toward a political system that solves the material issues of the people who voted for Trump out of frustration, then it's time to elect Bernie Sanders.